about to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free.
Afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our latest GCSE Business Live Revision Blast. It's Jim here. I'm joined today by two familiar faces. We've got Susan and Mike for a session on sources of finance.
Hello.
Key topic, Susan, Mike, isn't it? I mean, it's one of those core topics, like all of the ones we've done in the sessions this term, which is likely to underpin students doing well next summer.
Definitely. Good afternoon, everyone. Looking forward to this one.
We've got lots to pack in, about 30 minutes or so. So if you're joining us live, you use the live chat if you wish, please do, to add your suggested answers into the live chat as we go through the activities. But also to ask any questions as we go, because Susan and Mike are very happy to clear up any misconceptions or questions you've got about this key topic as we go. So feel free, don't be shy. Of course, if you're watching on replay, we can't use the live chat, but you get a chance to maybe pause the video and give yourself a bit more time, because some really good revision activities today on this topic. Who's kicking off today? Is it Susan or Mike?
Mike.
It's me.
Right, enjoy.
Thank you. And in time-honoured fashion, we're going to start with the big reveal. So you need to try to work out the name of the well-known business which is hidden behind the question mark. You're going to get 5 clues, and the first of them is on the screen. The founder named the business after the 3 initials of his name in 1945. So founded in 1945 and named after the 3 initials of the founder's name. No guesses so far. You can put your guesses in the chat window here, and you can have as many goes as you want. Second clue, the business is featured in many songs, including a Christmas #1 in 2005. Business is featured in many songs, including a Christmas #1 in 2005. Let's have a look at the third clue. Its products are often used on Formula One circuits to rescue cars that have come off the track. Should be giving you more of an idea. I haven't seen a correct answer yet. I do know it's not Apple. Let's have the fourth clue, please. The machines it produces are almost always yellow, with the second most popular colour being green and then red. So 4 clues so far. See if you can scoop the right answer. Let's have a look at the final clue then. It's the largest manufacturer of construction equipment in Europe, has 22 factories around the world, but it's most well known for its diggers. It's not Coca-Cola. Good guess. Please keep the guesses coming. Remember, you can have as many goes as you want. We won't reveal the answer for a few seconds. That last clue is quite telling, I think. Okay, I've not seen the correct answer, but thanks for all the guesses. Let's have a look. It is, of course, JCB, named after the founder, or the founder's initials. I believe it's John Christian Bamford. I can see now we got a correct answer in, or close to a correct answer from Florence. Well done, everyone. That's a really useful warm-up activity. Susan, I'll hand over to you for the beginning of Sources of Finance, really.
Thank you, Mike. So our first activity linked to Sources of Finance is a bingo activity. And what I'd like you to do is to list as many different sources of finance into the chat window that you can think of. And then we'll start our bingo machine, and then you can match up the sources of finance that we've suggested with your own. So Jim, let's start the bingo boards, please. So in the chat window, list as many different sources of finance as you can. So when we refer to sources of finance, think about where the business gets its money from. So we've had bank overdraft already, so that might give you a clue to some others. Think about, possibly to give you some more clues, the reasons why finance would be needed in a business. Sources of finance can be grouped into different categories, so that again might give you a clue. Internal sources of finance, so money available from within a business, and external sources of finance, the money coming from outside of a business, or dependent on your specification, short-term and long-term sources of finance. So we've got Misana, we're saying retained profit, that's excellent. We've got credit cards and loans. So try and think of some others. Payables, so we've got some nice terminology here coming through. So let's have a look at our responses. And I'm not going to go through the definitions with you because Mike's going to do that in an activity a bit later on. But match up your ideas with our answers on screen and see if they're the same. So we've got bank loan, overdraft, which we had in the chat window, retained profit, so well done, because that was in Misana, as I mentioned earlier. Share issue, we've had that in the chat window as well. Selling assets, and finally trade credit. So there are a wide range of sources of finance that are available to businesses, and you could have had, dependent on your specification, venture capital, new partners, leasing, hire purchase, owners funds, family and friends, crowdfunding, grants, lots of different types of sources of finance. So well done, because I think we had most of those in the chat window that we had on screen. So our next activity is a categorize activity, and it links in with our previous activity when I was talking about internal and external sources of finance. So in a moment, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to separate the different sources of finance that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen into these two groups. So internal sources of finance is finance available from within a business. And external sources of finance is finance that is available or made available from outside of the business. So all you need to do is in the chat window, it's type the word internal. And if you think share issue, bank loans and crowdfunding, are internal sources of finance. Just put internal and numbers 1, 2 and 3 next to that particular title. I'm not saying that share issue, bank loans and crowdfunding are internal sources of finance. They may be, but that's up to you to decide. So type your answers into the chat window and we'll start the timer, please, Jim. Thank you so much for the contributions in the chat window. We've got lots of different answers coming through. So let's take a look at the correct answers. So we had 2 internal sources of finance, sale of assets and retained profit. And as I said, Mike will be completing an activity where he'll be going through the definitions. And our external sources of finance are trade credit, overdraft, share issue, bank loans, crowdfunding and family and friends. And as is written in the chat window, most sources of finance are external. As you can see, we've got 6 external sources of finance here compared to 2 internal sources of finance. And it's really important that you recognise which source of finance comes into which category, because that could form a multiple choice question in an exam paper. And it's really important to get these easy wins in terms of the marks when you're completing assessments. So I'm just going to talk you through some exam gold before I hand back to Mike. I've seen in the chat window that somebody was asking about debentures. Debentures doesn't tend to feature in GCSE Business specifications. So just be more concerned about the definition of a traditional bank loan. So sources of finance is a topic that appears in all GCSE Business specifications. As Jim mentioned at the start of the session, how important this topic really is. However, the sources of finance listed in each course do differ. For example, crowdfunding, and that all crowdfunding is raising money from a range of investors online for a particular project or business, appears on the Edexcel and OCR specifications, but not on AQA or the Welsh Board. Loans from family and friends is featured on the AQA and Welsh specification, but not on Edexcel or OCR. So we are going to concentrate on the sources of finance that are common to all courses in today's session. So there's 6 of them, but this doesn't mean that these are the only sources that you need to know. Make sure you print off and review your own specification to ensure that you cover all the appropriate sources of finance and all the content really when you are revising. Make sure you revise the content that is relevant to you. So I'm going to hand over to Mike in a second, just to recap on some key terms. So internal sources of finance refers to the money that is available from within a business. And if you can remember, the 2 main sources of internal sources of finance are retained profit and selling unwanted assets. There are usually limited amounts of internal finance that a business can access. And as a result, in terms of the next key term, the external sources of finance is money raised from outside of the business, and there are more external sources of finance that are available to businesses, and therefore larger amounts of money can be accessed by businesses than can be available from internal sources. And as I've mentioned, bank loan, overdraft, share issue, trade credit are 4 examples of external sources of finance. So I'm going to hand over to Mike now. He's going to talk you through our next activity.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you everyone who's contributed. Please keep those contributions coming in the chat window. Keep the questions coming. if any arise. We're going to look at a 60-second matching exercise. So the challenge is to match the source of finance on the left with the explanation on the right. As the name suggests, you're going to have 60 seconds in which to do this. Please, can you start the clock, Jim? My thanks to Jim for filling in the chat window what I should have told you beforehand. Please just match the letter and the number. You don't have to type the whole thing, and you can do them one by one. So, for example, A1, B2, and so forth. Thank you. Masana, got something in there from you. Please keep the answers coming. We're looking to match the source of finance with the explanation on the right. So the letter with the correct number. A few more seconds and then we'll look at the answers. Give these a go. Really important just to attempt these, even if you're not too sure. This is a learning experience. Okay, thank you for the responses we've had so far. Let's look at the answers. So first of all, bank loan. Bank loan goes with number 4. So a bank loan is an amount of money borrowed for a set period of time with an agreed repayment schedule, which includes interest. It's different to an overdraft. Some of you have thought that that number 4 went with overdraft. We'll get to that in just a moment. B, share issue, goes with number 3. It's finance raised through the sale of shares, either privately or on the stock exchange. C, overdraft, goes with number 5. An overdraft is different to a bank loan. It's an agreement with the bank to overspend on an account up to an agreed amount. So there's a set limit. Overdrafts and bank loans are different and they're used for different purposes. D, retained profit, goes with number 2. They're funds kept within a business for reinvestment and growth rather than given to shareholders as dividends. Retained profit, there's no interest to pay and it doesn't involve giving away a share in ownership. E, trade credit, is where a supplier provides goods to a business but is willing to wait for payment until a later date. So raw materials may be delivered and then they're paid for at a later date, maybe a month afterwards. And lastly there, sale of assets. F is selling items of value that are no longer needed by the business, such as spare land. So sale of assets, selling items of value no longer needed by the business. Well done if you got those right. If you didn't, then you should be able to see the correct matchups there, the correct pairings, that's the word. Okay, let's look at some true or false questions then. And in answer to these, all you need to do is put a T or an F in the chat window. T if you think it's true, of course. F if you think it's false. Question number 1 on the screen there. Using retained profits as a source of finance means that no interest or repayments must be made. If you were listening before, I may have given you a clue. Using retained profits as a source of finance means that no interest or repayments must be made. Is it true or is it false? You don't have to type the whole word. You can just do a T or an F. Well, the correct answer here, of course, is true. As I said before, retained profits don't need to be repaid with interest, don't need to be repaid at all, perhaps. Masana, I think you were first with that one as well. Let's do another one. A business will always gain a higher price than it paid when it sells an asset. Note the wording here. A business will always gain a higher price than it paid when it sells an asset. Is that true or is it false? T for true, F for false, please. Answer in the chat window. Is it true or is it false? I think general agreement on this one that it is false. Won't always gain a higher price than it paid when it sells the asset. It may rarely get a higher price when it sells an asset. It would depend entirely on the asset and the current value. So as Masana correctly suggested in the chat window there, certain assets like machines will be depreciated. They will decrease in value as they're used. Let's have a look at another true or false. Number 3 here. Selling assets is an unsustainable source of finance. Selling assets is an unsustainable source of finance. T for true, F for false. See what you think. Selling assets is an unsustainable source of finance. Chowdhury, thank you for your answer. I think you were first in with that one. And the answer here, not universal agreement on this. Selling assets is an unsustainable source of finance. It's true. The business will have a finite amount of assets, so it won't be able to continue selling them forever. Well done if you got that right. Using retained profits and the funds raised through the sale of assets will not dilute the ownership of the business. Using retained profits and the funds raised through the sale of assets will not dilute the ownership of a business. Is that true or is it false? Some good chat and some good information, useful information in the chat window there, noting that some assets can increase in value, for example land, but most will fall in value over time. So going back to the previous question. So using retained profits and the funds raised through the sale of assets will not dilute the ownership of the business. Is that true or is it false? The overall consensus seems to be that it's true, and that's because it is true. Retained profits and funds raised through the sale of assets won't dilute the ownership of the business because you're not giving away a share of ownership in selling those things or in using those sources of finance. One more. Our final true or false question before I hand back to Susan. And retaining more profits will affect the amount of dividends available to shareholders. So the more profit the business retains, the more it will affect the amount of dividends available to shareholders. Is that true or is it false? Is it true or is it false? Answers in the chat window. Only needs to be a T or an F. Remember, you don't have to type the whole word. Is it true or is it false? Retaining more profits will affect the amount of dividends available to shareholders. True or false? More challenging question. Let's have a look at the answer. Of course, it's true. The more profit the business retains, the less will be available to pay in dividends to shareholders. So it will indeed affect the amount of dividends available to shareholders. Great question and some great answers as well. Susan, I will hand back to you.
Thank you, Mike. So our next activity is our 2-statement MCQs. So I'm going to show you 5 different questions. And for each question, I'm going to read 2 statements to you. And all you need to do is to decide whether each statement is true or false. Once you've decided, just match up your answers with the letters A, B, C, or D, and then type that letter into the chat window. So let's have a look at this first question. So statement 1, interest is payable on an overdraft when it is in use and not in use. So think about whether that is true or false. And the second statement, the bank is able to withdraw an overdraft facility at any time. So is that again true or false? So if you think they're both true, so both statements are true, you type A into the chat window. If you think statement 1 is true, but statement 2 is false, then type B into the chat window. If you think statement 1 is false, but statement 2 is true, then type C into the chat window. And if you think both statements are false, then type D into the chat window. So we're looking now in these 5 questions at external sources of finance, and this question links to the disadvantages of an overdraft. So think carefully about the disadvantages linked to this source of finance. So it's always worth having a guess, but think and reread each statement carefully to see whether you think the answers are true or false. So remember, an overdraft is a flexible form of finance. It's available as a temporary source of finance when you need additional funds to tide you over. So think about when interest would be paid and if that facility would ever be overdrawn. So thank you for your contributions, and we'll have a look at this first answer. And the answer, so well done, Masana, is C. So interest is only payable on an overdraft when it is in use, not when it's not in use. And that is the reason why interest rates on overdrafts are quite high. Statement 2 is actually true. So the bank is able to withdraw an overdraft facility at any time. And this is a major disadvantage of an overdraft for businesses because it can leave them short of funds to pay their day-to-day bills. If a bank believes that there is a risk that a business will not be able to repay its overdraft, it is likely to withdraw it. So well done. Thank you for your contributions. It's a tricky question. So question 2, we're going to be looking at trade credit. So statement 1, trade credit improves the cash flow of a business. So think about whether that is true or false. And statement 2, trade credit is always easy for new businesses to arrange. So again, is that true or false? Match up your decisions with the letters or a letter and then type that letter into the chat window. So we covered cash flow in last week's session. So if you were here for that session, then we watched that session, try and remember what we covered, as we did mention trade credit last week. Trade credit, remember, is when suppliers allow businesses to pay at a later date for goods received now. So would that improve the cash flow of the business? Think about the timings of inflows and outflows. And is trade credit always easy for new businesses to arrange? So thank you for your contributions. We've got Masana again with answer B, and let's see if that's the correct answer. And it is, so well done. So trade credit does improve the cash flow of a business because it allows the business the opportunity to sell goods before it has to pay for them. So that statement is actually true. And statement 2 is false. You have to read the question really carefully because trade credit isn't always easy for new businesses to arrange because there is a risk with new businesses that they may fail. Many new businesses fail, and therefore suppliers may be reluctant to give trade credit to businesses or new businesses because there's a risk that they may not get paid for their goods. Therefore, they'd want their supplies to be paid for upfront. So well done again. Thank you for your contributions. So let's have a look at question 3. And this links to an overdraft. So an overdraft is a useful source of finance for seasonal businesses. So is that true or false for statement 1? And statement 2, an overdraft is a suitable source of finance to fund business growth. So is that again true or false? And then type your answer into the chat window. If you're not sure what a seasonal business is, that's a business like an ice cream shop or a ski shop or a swimwear shop, where it will have peaks in terms of its sales at certain times of the year. So that's what a seasonal business is. For statement 2, think about, would an overdraft be a suitable source of long-term finance to fund business growth? So we've got an answer coming through again. So well done. And let's see if that answer is correct, Jim. And again, well done, Masana. The answer is B. So thank you for all your contributions. So statement 1 is true. An overdraft is a useful source of finance for seasonal businesses because it provides finance during periods of time where sales may be low, and therefore extra finance is needed to pay those day-to-day bills. And an overdraft is a short-term source of finance. So statement 2 is actually false. So it wouldn't be suitable to fund business growth. Long-term sources of finance are suitable for business growth, such as retained profits or share capital or a bank loan. So well done, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. And we'll take a look at the next question. So statement 1, banks may require some form of security that repayments will be made on time before agreeing to a loan. So is that true or false? And then statement 2, a business plan will help a business organise a bank loan. Again, is that true or false? And type your answer into the chat window. So, just to remind you, a business plan is a document that sets out what a business intends to do and what it aims for in a certain time period. And that would have been taught to you in a different area of the specification. Security on loans is also called collateral. So you may have heard of that. Your teachers may have been talking to you about collateral or some form of security on bank loans. So you may have heard that term instead. So let's take a look at the answer. We've got some answers coming through again, and A is the correct answer. So well done if you got that answer right again. So banks may require some form of security that repayments will be made on time before agreeing to a loan, because they will then have some guarantee that they're going to get their money back. And statement 2 is also true, because if a business has produced a business plan, it will show the bank that they're highly organised. The bank will see what the business is wanting to spend its money on, and therefore the business is more likely to have an agreed loan with the bank. The bank is more likely to accept the bank loan and provide that to the business if it is approached by that business who has produced a business plan. So well done, everyone. And the last question on this particular activity is question 5. So, and this links to statement 1, no control is lost over a business when finance is raised through the sale of new shares. So we're looking at share capital this time. And dividend payments must always be paid to shareholders. So that's statement 2. So look at those statements again and decide if they are true or false. Some great answers coming through on the chat window. So I've just had a look at the previous question for Gabby's. Statement true is true because the bank will see that you're reliable. So well done. That shows really good understanding of business planning. So for this question, look to see whether each statement is true or false. Dividends, remember, is a share of the profits given to shareholders as a reward for investing in a particular business. So we've got some answers coming through. So let's take a look at the answer to this particular one, and it is D. So well done if you've got all those answers correct. Both statements are false. So control is lost over a business when finance is raised through the sale of new shares, because there will be new owners coming into the business who want some control over decision making. And dividend payments must always be paid to shareholders. That isn't true. The board of directors or the owners of a business will decide whether a dividend is paid to shareholders or the owners. So a share of the profits is given out. Doesn't always have to happen. The board of directors will decide how much to retain in the business and how much to distribute. And that's entirely up to the owners or the board of directors. So well done, everyone. There's some tough questions in there, but I can see you've got really good understanding of external sources of finance and their pros and cons. So before I hand back to Mike, I'm just going to talk you through some exam gold. So as well as internal and external sources of finance, some exam boards, e.g. Edexcel, categorize sources of finance into short-term and long-term sources of finance. And it's really important that you know which sources fall into which category. And as I mentioned earlier, This type of question can easily form a multiple choice question or a short answer question, so for example, a list or a give question. For the exam, you must be able to accurately and precisely define each source of finance listed in your specific specification, and defined questions will appear in exam papers. And you also must be able to explain their specific pros and cons. Try and avoid making statements such as a source of finance is cheap or expensive. You must be able to explain why a source of finance is more expensive compared to another source of finance, for example. Following on for that, you must be able to compare and contrast different sources of finance. For example, in a longer mark question, you may be presented with two sources of finance as bullet points, and you might need to justify which source of finance is appropriate for the business in its current situation. Now, sources of finance that are usually listed in this type of question are share capital, bank loans, and retained profits. So I'm just going to point out the main benefits or the main features of these sources of finance to help you in a question such as this. So it's worth remembering that the main benefit of share capital, in contrast to using a bank loan, is that share capital does not need to be repaid, and there's no interest, therefore, that needs repaying as well. However, using share capital does dilute the ownership of the business. Using retained profits means the business will not be in debt or adding to any existing debt. But if retained profit appears in an exam question, look carefully at the case study to determine whether the business is profitable or not. You may see some figures included in a context that you might be able to complete a calculation for and include that in your answer, and that will help you to see if retained profits is a realistic source of finance for the business to use. And also using figures will really help you to gain those tricky marks for application that often students find difficult to gain in exam questions and when they're answering that questions that require application in their answers. So well done, everyone. Some great chat there in the chat window, and I'll hand back to Mike for the next activity.
Thanks, Susan. We're going to do a Give Me 4 exercise. We're going to do a couple of them actually, but we're going to start with reasons why finance is needed in a business. So the task here is to try to give 4 reasons why finance is needed in a business. You don't need to give all 4 of them together. You can put them in the chat window one by one. Okay, so reasons why finance is needed in a business, ideally getting to as many as 4. We're going to be against the clock though. And there we go, only 30 seconds, so not very long. If you're still typing, that's okay. We've got answers coming through. Thank you for your contribution so far. Brilliant answers as well. So reasons why finance is needed in a business. I'm looking down the list here. I can see equipment. I'm seeing advertising for growth. I'm seeing startup, buying fixed. I think we mean fixed assets and perhaps current assets rather than variable, or fixed and variable costs there. So lots and lots of options. Well done those who have contributed, and hopefully you're able to get some of the ones we've got on our list. Let's have a little look. So 4 reasons why finance may be needed in a business. To establish a new business, well done. Lots of people saying to start up, and also lots of people saying to fund expansion. Number 3 there, keep the business operating on a day-to-day business. Businesses need cash, they need finance, they need money available to pay day-to-day expenses. And they're also going to need to replace any worn-out assets. So when they're setting up, when they're expanding, they may be buying new assets, but they may also need to replace them as they become worn. as they become used. Really good answers, guys. Thank you so much. And we're in the swing of this now, so let's do another Give Me 4 exercise. Again, we're working against the clock. This time we're looking for factors to help determine the suitability of a source of finance. We've looked in this session at lots of different sources of finance. What factors may be used to help determine which source of finance or sources of finance is most suitable? We're looking for 4. Do them individually, type them in the chat window, and we'll look at the answers after. Good luck. Good stuff. If you're still typing, don't worry. 30 seconds is pretty quick, and I can see again answers coming through. Anvi, thanks for your response, which I think was first, but I'm sure we'll get lots more as well. So we're looking at factors to help determine the suitability of a source of finance, and Anvi's put there limited or unlimited business. If you look at number 3 on our list, the type of business ownership, indeed, some source of finance may not be available to different types of business ownership. So, for example, selling shares wouldn't be available to sole traders or to partnerships. So, whether the business has limited or unlimited liability, whether it's incorporated or unincorporated, will make a difference. We also need to consider, or the business need to consider, what the money is needed for, what the money is going to be used for. What's going to be purchased with that money? Is it for day-to-day expenses, in which case an overdraft may be more suitable? Is it to buy long-term assets? Is it to buy machinery or vehicles, in which case a longer-term source of finance may be more appropriate? Business also needs to consider how much is required. We've talked about retained profit. Retained profits will be finite, they'll be limited, so they may consider how much is required. If they don't have enough retained profit, they'll have to look at other sources of finance. The last one on our list there is the owner, or are the owners willing to give up any control over the business? If the answer to that is no, then raising money through selling shares would be less appropriate. If the owner or owners are willing to give up any control, then it would be more appropriate. Really well done. Thanks for your answers. Let's look at one more bit of exam gold. Remember that source of finance is a very commonly assessed topic. You could see multiple choice questions, you could see short answer questions, you could see extended response questions on this area of the specification. In an extended response question, you may be asked to select an appropriate source of finance to meet the needs of a specific business. If that's the case, just make sure that you really think about the situation of the business, the context of that business. So, for example, an overdraft would not be appropriate to fund business growth. Share capital would be inappropriate for a sole trader unless it was looking to change its legal structure to a private limited company. So as we looked at before, we said that the type of business ownership is going to be a determining factor in choosing a source of finance. Share capital wouldn't be appropriate for a sole trader unless they're prepared to change the legal structure. Final point here, so crucial, you must also ensure you show precise knowledge and understanding of any and all sources of finance featured in a question. Vague points that could relate to a number of different sources may not be rewarded by many, if any, marks in an exam. So ensure your knowledge and understanding is precise for all of these sources of finance. And that's a really crucial point to finish on, I think.
Fantastic. And it's a good point, isn't it? I mean, we've seen it on display, haven't we, in this session? Students with a really precise knowledge and understanding of these different sources and purposes of finance. So I've no doubt at all that our live audience tonight will do really well on any questions on this topic, and hopefully, I'm sure, the replay audience too. What do you think? Pretty impressive, weren't they?
Really strong answers. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent contributions. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, to have that level of understanding and knowledge at this stage, it bodes really well. We've got some tough weeks and months ahead in terms of mocks and tests and the real exams in the summer, but that is really encouraging because it's a core topic, isn't it? Absolutely vital topic. Sources of finance goes right to the heart of business, just like break even. He says, opining, sat here pontificating. Fantastic stuff. That was amazing. So, well, a huge thanks to Susan and Mike for putting the session together. That was a really good session. Those questions were tough. There wasn't an easy one in there. So that was really good. So don't forget, if you go to tutorT.net/live down there, you can access this, but all the other GCSE business sessions we've done this calendar year. There must be 20, 30 of them that we've covered. So I reckon we've covered just about all of the specification in one way or another. So with Susan and Mike and Pete and Graham and the team. So please do go make use of that. All of it's there, including all the slides if you want to download any of the stuff, the exam gold advice, all that kind of stuff. And whilst you're there, if you're doing GCSE other subjects like sociology or geography, make use of those as well. It's all there for you. Are we done? Are we good? I think we're done, aren't we? Great session. We have another session next week, and then I think we might even have a festive quiz the week after next. A live festive GCSE quiz. We'll see.
There's something to look forward to. Too right.
Awesome. Many thanks for everyone who's joined us. As always, we do ask if you found the session useful, give it a thumbs up on YouTube. And it's a regular slot, isn't it? Thursday, 4:30, GCSE Business. So hopefully we'll see you this time next week. See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.